Welcome, welcome, welcome. Welcome to Crashes and Taxes. I am your host for this podcast, Rebecca Walser. So glad you could be with me. For those of you that get frustrated and send us a message that I don't have this podcast every week, I totally understand your frustration. I totally get it. There's a lot of my favorites that I watch every week too, and I get really upset when they don't give me new material. And I say to myself, gosh, don't they have just 15 minutes to record something? And then I say to myself, gosh, I don't always have 15 minutes every week. And as you can imagine, this week has been a challenge because of everything that is going on in the world. So in the last week, so you guys, I apologize for not always being consistent. We're definitely, my team and I are trying as best we can to be consistent because we love our podcast subscribers. We love you guys. You are really awesome. And we want to make sure that we keep you engaged. And the only way to do that is to keep doing videos. So please bear with us as the market goes through these massive changes, as we become aware of the more and more things that are going on globally in this world, which we will become more aware of this year. I want to use this forum to speak to you, to talk to you guys, to see how you're feeling about everything, to see how you're doing through everything. And obviously, I need to be consistent with that. So my team and I are doing everything we can to get me the time I need every week to actually do this podcast and keep you up with us. So let's talk about what's going on right now. You know, we've had sort of a whipsaw. We went through last week. It was a really bad retrenchment week, and it was actually a blessing in disguise, I think. And that's because, and I'm talking specifically about the week where gold popped. So gold was resistant. We had a resistance level of 1930 on gold. It had stayed under 1930 for a long, long time, hadn't jumped through it. And the second that we started to see Russia into Ukraine, and we started to see some things about the dollar and the oil issues, we finally saw it break through resistance, and it popped in that single day all the way to $2,062 per ounce. So if you want to know the economics of it, most economists are going to be Wall Street economists. They're going to tell you that you can't time the market. You should stay in. You should never try to, strategize when to buy out. And for the most part, that is true. I have to admit they have the math on their side. People do not appropriately time the market when they try to self-time it. They don't. You can never know for sure the highest high and the point to sell, the sell high piece, and you can never know the lowest low, the buy low when to buy back in. So timing the market is not the solution. But I'll give you examples. If you look at the .com crash, the S&P 500 went down 49% over 3 years in a row of losses. And let's look at Warren Buffett's Berkshire Hathaway. Berkshire Hathaway under Warren Buffett's management. Everyone thinks of Warren Buffett as one of the most prolific investors of all time. Berkshire Hathaway under Warren Buffett's management, same .com crash where the S&P went down 49%, Berkshire Hathaway went down 48%. If you look at the Great Recession, it's globally known as the global financial crisis, the GFC, we call it the Great Recession in America. The market, the S&P 500 over 18 months from October of 07 to March of 09, that 18-month period, the market, the S&P 500 went down 57%. In that same time frame, Berkshire Hathaway went down 50.7% under Warren Buffett. So even as great as Warren Buffett is, it is absolutely a fact that nobody can time the market. We aren't market timers either at my firm, at Walser Wealth. We don't time the market. We adjust to the market. And we do that through tactical management. What that means is when we see this, and this, that means we know to go and make changes to our management style of A, B, and C. That's what we're doing. We see, 1, 2, 3 over here as factors, and we know, that means we need to go from 1, 2, 3 over here, A, B, C. I'm not talking to you about specific parameters because, that would be something I would just be discussing with clients. What would we be looking to put you into? What sectors will we move to? What sectors are working well for us in this recession? All of those things we would expect to do if you were a client. This is the podcast, so we don't discuss specifically the sectors that we're looking at right now and all of those things as if you guys were clients. But I wanted to just let you know that normally, under normal circumstances, we would fully stay in the market. We would just move to different sectors. We would just say, hey, no, this sector is not going to perform this year. Here's why. Let's move over to this. Let's move over to that. We are sort of beyond all of that right now. And this is why we have been looking at accumulating and taking and recognizing profits, paying some gains, and then moving to more safety. That's what we've really been discussing and moving towards really since November of last year. We made that a push because you can't time the market correctly. And if you see a convergence, as I see this convergence coming, I've never seen the global factors that we've had, and nor have these factors ever existed before in the history of time. So let's go over the top 5 things that are happening right now that are globally unprecedented. Globally unprecedented. So the very first thing that we'll go through, and because these are globally unprecedented because they're all happening as a convergence at the same time. So each individual thing might have happened before by itself, but have all of these 5 things happen together globally to make us have to react. That's what hasn't happened before. So we have a global convergence of circumstances happening in America that have never happened together before. That's the global convergence I'm talking about. So let's talk about the first one. A 100-year pandemic. We haven't had a pandemic since the smallpox in the 1914 to 18 time period. Could be off 1 or 2 years, so don't quote me on that. But around that time frame, 1912 to 1918, it didn't last that long. I just don't know the exact age range in there, year range. So we had the global smallpox. We were like in the middle of a war. World War I was starting then or going on then. We still had people going to war. So this is the first time in the history of the world that a pandemic has had people shut down and quarantine healthy people. That's not normally how we deal with it. We had a lot of virologists and a lot of other medical professionals, epidemiologists that said that you will just delay herd immunity if you shut down. So we voluntarily shut down the economies of the world. And unfortunately, we haven't learned the lesson that didn't work, even though there's a lot of data now where we can compare countries that didn't shut down with countries that did shut down. And even at home in America, we can compare states that shut down versus states that didn't shut down. And I'll give you the 2 best prime examples, New York and California versus Texas and Florida. So I would say Texas and Florida would be the non-shutdown states, New York and California are the shutdown states. And if you can look at their case counts and you look at their case spikes and you look at their death rates, you'll see that New York and California did not perform better than Florida and Texas because they had more evasive restrictions and they continued to have people quarantined for longer. So shutdown is not helpful in this kind of situation. But what did it do to our economy? Well, it obviously truly affected and impacted our economy because globally, the world has printed close to $30 trillion of stimulus globally, of currency. And in America, some 40% of our currency in circulation has been printed in the last 2 years. So we have a massive currency influx since Corona that was overdone, that basically brought up our markets. So number 1 was the global pandemic. Now, this is not over. As much as in America we want to believe it's over, we have China this week, literally, and last week, shutting down factories, Toyota, Volkswagen, shutting down Foxconn, which is the largest supplier and of all parts for Apple. That is their, I mean, it's basically, it's not Apple, but it is basically how Apple produces their phones. They're shut down. Apple's going to have to redo estimates. So if we continue to have China have a zero COVID policy, we're going to have to consider them as our main supply chain partner because zero COVID is not realistic. We live with the flu. We have a flu shot every season for people that want to take that shot to get them through the flu season. They can, but we don't shut down our economy because we have a bad flu season. It's just it's not sustainable. So that's number 1. And we still have that going on actively right now as we speak. We still have these cases spiking and we still have that's the resolution, to shut down. No, we need therapeutics. We need to figure out how to get people back to work as fast as possible. And let's move on. I'm not trying to be crass about Corona. I know a lot of people have died. And it's a horrible situation. I'm not dealing with that part of it right now. I'm just dealing with the economic part of it. So that's number 1. Number 2, We obviously have the war situation with Russia invading Ukraine. We are extremely concerned because the statements that China keeps putting out about China moving into Taiwan in the very, very imminent future. That will only exacerbate the world stage of what's happening. We have, North Korea acting like they want to get involved in this action. We have Iran that is sending bombs into Iraq over a weekend, and on and on I could go. The geopolitical instability. Let's just put this into perspective. We have Russia that is basically stating to the United Nations publicly that they believe the U.S. funds biolaboratories in the Ukraine, which they have admitted to. It's on the U.S. Embassy's website. This is nothing that's being trying to be hidden. We have these 25 to 30 biological labs. Victoria Nuland, in response to a question by Senator Marco Rubio, answered that question by saying that the Ukraine, when he asked, does the U.S. fund biolabs in the Ukraine? I guess that's like the conspiracy theory way of saying it. Does the U.S. fund biolabs in the Ukraine? And Victoria Nuland, who is the Undersecretary of State for America, said that the Ukraine has research biological laboratories and over this past weekend, so that would be, I don't know when this show is going to exactly run, that would have been the weekend of March the 12th and 13th, CBS News confirmed that these labs, some of these labs do have anthrax and the plague, and that they have been used for defensive purposes. And that is why Victoria Nuland was extremely concerned that Russia invasion might get Russia a hold of those chemical and biological weapons. So we have potentially a global World War III potential on our hands. And how do I say that? How do I see that? Well, obviously, if you have Russia saying that the U.S. is funding biolabs in Ukraine, true or not true, we seem to confirm it with Victoria Nuland and with CBS News. The only thing that doesn't seem to really be necessarily accurate is that obviously Putin is ascribing this to be an offensive move, and the U.S. is describing it as to be a research and biological protective move, defensive, not offensive. But nevertheless, we've admitted that those things are being funded by us, and do have those agents. So what's happened now that's alarming on the geopolitical front beyond Russia and going into Ukraine is that China seems to be backing Russia up. I mean, Xi Jinping basically has now called, and China has now called for the United States to prove that we actually don't have biological weapons in Ukraine, and to let a third party, sort of like we did with Saddam Hussein, when we claimed that he had weapons of mass destruction, we wanted independent agencies to go in and confirm that those weapons were not there. That's what Xi Jinping is basically calling for the United States to send or to allow for international inspection agencies made up of multiple demographic countries to go in and verify that these are in fact just research facilities and not actually bioweapon warfare labs. So you have China partnering up to Russia or backing up Russia against the United States. That's very alarming and very concerning. That's number two. Number three, oil. The energy and oil supply that has changed since this administration has taken shape. I just want to remind everybody of the facts of the energy production in 2020, which was the last year that we have full numbers on. We don't have the full 2021 numbers yet, but we know that in 2020, America was the largest daily producer of oil. We produced over 11 billion, I wish, 11 million barrels of oil a day. Russia did over 11 million. Russia did over 10 million barrels of oil a day in 2020. And Saudi Arabia was in third place with over 9 billion barrels of oil a day. Since we have we've killed the Keystone Pipeline XL. We have done all of these things that we've not renewed leases. We have stopped drilling in Anwar. We've done all these things. So Jen Psaki, the spokesperson, basically said a few weeks back that we have have 9,000 leases. What she didn't give you was a point of context and reference. We used to have 40,000. So we have greatly, vastly reduced in the name of the green movement. I mean, we're all about supporting our environment and our economy. We just can't do it at the impetus of our economy. We won't have an environment and an economy. So I think that, people that are on the green side love it. It's like we're jumping 20 years into the future. We won't be using fossil fuels. The problem is we don't have alternatives to fuel right now these things. So oil not being produced by the United States intentionally through this administration's green movements, as well as the restrictions that Russia is not, we're basically now not buying Russian oil. So we basically decided that Biden announced, I believe, in his press conference that we would no longer allow Russian oil tankers to offload at our ports in America. So then, since that time, Biden has had to go to other world leaders and find us, new sources. So he has gone. He called UAE, United Arab Emirates. He definitely called Venezuela and Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia and UAE both told him, "We're not changing anything. We're not doing anything. No." So that's when he reached out to Venezuela. I understand that Maduro also has turned down our administration on any new gas or new oil. So that leaves Iran. And of course, we have a big problem because we have a lot of sanctions on Iran that are going to have to be removed to be able to start doing business with them on an oil basis. So that brings up the Iranian deal that Biden and Obama together were beginning and actually passed when Obama was still president. So that's number 3. Oil. We have a massive energy crisis that is coming. We're seeing it in the gas lines. We're not seeing it in the price of oil. The price of oil has retrenched some. But again, we know that these markets can be manipulated. And I think what's happening is we're releasing some reserves and some things like that. And that's why we dropped down from the 116 price per barrel. We're at 103 as we trade right now. So there's that. So that's number 3. Let's move on to the impact of number 3 to number 4, which is the world food supply. The world food supply is largely produced. We were only able to get to 8 billion people from the probably natural sustainably. If you just use organic everything and you didn't have any chemicals of any kind, you probably would have a world population of 1 to 2 billion. We got to a population of 18 billion because we increased massively our food supply when we finally went to commercial aggregation, commercial agriculture. I'm talking so fast today, I can't even speak. When we moved to commercial agriculture, so what did we do to go to commercial agriculture besides industrial machines? Well, obviously, fertilizers. Fertilizers allowed the earth to burst forth in a lot more productive output, which allowed us to feed more mouths, which has allowed our population to grow without starvation and without passing away because there wasn't enough food. So how are fertilizers derived? Well, they're derived 2 ways. They are either derived through nitrates and aluminum as a natural gas byproduct, or they're derived through petro and the byproducts of the actual fossil fuel itself. So for example, 1 acre of corn takes 100 pounds of petro fertilizer to actually grow. And it also takes another, it's so much. But the point is 1 acre of corn takes that much. So what these corn farmers in America are saying is corn is now economically unviable and we're going to move to soybeans. Well, the corn farmers, besides producing all of the corn that goes into corn, high fructose corn syrup, cornmeal, they're producing the cornmeal that feeds the livestock. So if we have a shortage of corn, we're going to have a shortage of food for livestock, and that means we're going to have a shortage of meat. We've already lost millions of poultry this year for viruses and infections. It's another problem. So we have a massive, we now have groups that are saying that there is a guaranteed global food shortage that's coming. And the hottest commodity right now, besides oil, is wheat, because Russia is one of the largest producers and exporters of wheat. And Russia, obviously, to counteract and balance all of the restrictions and the sanctions of the West, they are saying they're not going to export any more wheat to control the food supply. And they're a big player. We can't just cut them out and think there's no repercussions. There are repercussions on oil and on wheat, not defending Putin in any way. So that's number 3, a potentially global food shortage. Number 4 relates to oil as well, and that is the end of the petrodollar that I've been discussing with you. So we have new developments this week that we're looking at, and I've been saying this for a long time, the BRICS countries intertrading between each other and their domestic currencies was a problem. But this week we now have Saudi Arabia talking to China about selling oil to China in dominate and taking the Chinese renminbi as the currency to sell the oil. And again, I mentioned to you that we had that agreement in 1974 with Saudi Arabia to only sell oil in US dollars. So this further weakens the US dollar as Saudi Arabia begins to sell oil in other currencies. This further weakens the US dollar. Further to that, to explain also that the US dollar has lost massive amounts of power, stealthily, by the way, is the fact that Jerome Powell testified to Congress in the last 2 weeks where he explained that the US dollar does not have to be the world's sole reserve currency, that we can have a basket of currencies. And this is exactly what we know. The IMF has been pushing a basket of 5 currencies as the reserve currency. The US dollar would be one among the Japanese yen, the British pound, the German, well, the EU, it used to be the German mark, so it's the EU, and the Chinese yuan. Those would be the 5 currencies that the IMF wants to create something called an SDR, special drawing right, as the world's reserve currency. So as the dollar becomes weaker, it becomes very clear that we are inching very fast away from the dollar as the sole reserve currency. And that spells massive trouble because we spend $3 trillion a year of money that we do not collect in taxes solely because we do and are able to sell those dollars to other countries that need them right now to buy their oil, among other things. The end of the petrodollar is the end of the American lifestyle that we've enjoyed as we know it. I'm not saying it's going to be horrible. I'm going to say it's going to be different. So that's the 4th thing. The 5th thing, of course, is everything else. And there's so many other things that I cannot even express it into one thing. But I would say besides the supply chain issues and the coronavirus and the wars and the dollar and oil and the food shortages, we have so much currency that went into the markets that they are just overinflated and they need to revert down to their mean. So we just cannot sustain. And that is, I'll give you the example to round out the 5th category is the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve was spending $120 billion a month during coronavirus to pump up the economy. And now we've gone from that $120 billion down in this month of March to 0. We're no longer going to be supporting purchases. In fact, we're going to be making sales. We'll be running off the balance sheet. So you've got the double whammy of both raising interest rates and then starting to sell off or retract, suck back in money supply. So when you have the Fed Reserve sucking back in money supply as they start to run off the balance sheet, the equity markets aren't going to like that either. So we have a lot of headwind in every direction, 360 degrees all around you. And there are positive things that are happening, but this is a sea of change. You should expect change. You should expect big market news and problems. And I would say be on the lookout the rest of March, these next 10 days, especially because there's a lot going on that we will see that will be impacting everything. Those are the 5 main headwinds I would say that we are facing right now. In a nutshell, lots of doom and gloom, but the hope is that you're aware, you're hearing it. And so a lot of people don't have any clue what's coming. They don't know what's going on. They just think everything's fine. Listen to the mainstream media, and the mainstream media says, oh, Putin's bad and Ukraine's great. And, no war is great. No war is right, but that doesn't mean that Ukraine in and of itself is a great country that we should be defending. We need to look at what they're doing and what their big business is. How do we have all of these politicians on both sides of the aisle? And I will remind you, it's not a Democrat or Republican thing. Corruption is corruption. It corrupts absolutely all sides. And we have all these politicians, daughters and sons on Ukrainian boards. You have to start to ask yourself, why is that? Hunter Biden being on the board of Burisma was the one you've probably heard about. You need to look into why do all of these politicians have their children on the boards of companies in the Ukraine? It's just very odd. I don't see any other country that has all that. So just a thought. Anyways, until next time, everybody, take care.